this year, the Supreme Court of the United States took up the case on California's controversial video game law, which would have made it a crime to sell violent video games to minors. Arguments were heard from both sides, and finally, around the end of June, the court rendered its decision striking down the controversial law, primarily on the grounds of the First Amendment. In Episode 3, we discussed the arguments that were presented toward the court. Now we follow up. What was their decision, and what did it mean for the industry? Do you agree or disagree with their decision? Let's give you some gamer perspective right here on Downloadable Content. Everyone to Downloadable Content. I'm Brian, still Brian, and with us we have the return of Peter from a long absence.
I've been busy.
You've been busy. Joshy.
Hello.
Nick.
Hey,
And Ron.
Hello, everyone.
And we are here to discuss matters of political importance. As much as I hate politics.
Politics.
Yeah.
gotta love all the issues we have, eh?
And even though, and we are very fortunate to have a Brit in this podcast.
I don't understand anything about your world.
To provide us with some slightly international perspective on this sort of stuff.
I'm just going to yell at you for most of the podcast.
You stupid Yankee shits.
I don't understand what your problem is, but I disagree.
That's okay. Still don't know why we have Independence Day. Britain is still the only friend we have left in the world. But anyway.
Yeah, screw you guys.
It's an excuse to get drunk.
So
that's why we had a war and many people died.
Over booze.
Yes. So, Peter, Erica, and Ron were on in Episode 3 when we talked about the actual arguments that were being presented toward the Supreme Court at that time. There was no decision yet, and we would have to wait several months for it in true political fashion. And just this past June, we finally got a decision. The law that was being argued before the Supreme Court, California had passed a law which would make it an actual crime to sell violent video games to minors. As soon as the law was passed, it was immediately appealed, so it never actually went into effect. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, where we had arguments on both sides, for and against. See if I can remember some of the discussion. I remember primarily, a lot of the argument against the law was First Amendment grounds.
It was First Amendment grounds, and also the law was too ambiguous and vague in its definition of violence.
Right. It did not specifically, clearly outline what California would perceive as violent. For example, is shooting up other virtual people violent as opposed to shooting up aliens?
Even, I think it was Justice Sotomayor even made that distinction, asking the California Council, is it okay? It's so under this law, it's not okay to do all these dastardly things to a human being, but could you do it to a Vulcan? And the defense counsel said that they wouldn't consider such violent acts to a Vulcan as illegal. Now, anyone who knows Star Trek knows, God, Vulcans look pretty darn human to us. They just don't talk human.
It didn't even follow the independent rating boards, right? It's not like all the 18-year-old rated games couldn't be sold to children. It was just generically anything we consider to be violent.
That's right. The rating system was
so
not...
how would any employee know which games they couldn't sell?
Yeah, and that was the big crux of the matter. I mean, in the United States, I mean, we have the ESRB, the Entertainment Software Rating Board. So we have our own rating system here, and this law would have totally ignored the rating system, and it would have set up its own independent council to determine what is considered, quote, violent. So, even though we already have a system in place for ratings and what constitutes those ratings, this would have created more government oversight to determine what was violent and what was not.
Because the only thing that's going to solve this problem is that there's going to be government insight in this situation now.
And it's probably fairly important to mention that the rating system is independently run by the industry. It's not the government rating video games.
No, it's not. The rating system was enacted in America. It was enacted in the mid-1990s in response to Mortal Kombat, in large part.
Mortal Kombat and Doom, yes.
A great reason to start an organization.
Well, I mean, before 1994, which is when the system went into place, Nintendo had its own ratings. Sega had its own, content ratings.
Sega had its rating system. Nintendo just put warnings on certain games.
Yeah, like, banned.
Mortal Kombat 2.
Like, there's blood here. But yeah, this would have created an independent panel to determine, and as we just discussed, there was nothing real specific about what constitutes violent. Meanwhile, the council for the game industry says, well, you can't do that. You can't, you can't just, think of the children. You can't...
Think of the children has been the crusade in all these kinds of laws for years, whether it's,
video games,
West
movies,
Virginia, or any of these things. So it really was very surprising that California would try a law like this when it had already been shot down as unconstitutional in several other states. Prior.
Yes, and so just as an aside here, I mean, the way it's in the United States, the video game rating system, they're not enforceable by law. What basically how it works with the sale of games in this country is the ESRB puts out a rating, and it's up to the store to create policy to try to enforce those ratings, and largely that's what they've done. Big stores like Walmart and Best Buy, GameStop, they have their own internal policies restricting the sale of M-rated games. It's not a crime. There's no fee or fine or jail time if a store sells Grand Theft Auto to a 10-year-old. There's none that,
Should be noted, this is a very similar system to what the movie industry does too. There is no law that says that R-rated movies cannot be shown to minors, but it's still, the movie theaters still unilaterally and voluntarily enforce that on their own.
They police themselves. So I mean, say if at Walmart you want to buy, Grand Theft Auto, and you're a 10-year-old wanting to buy this, you're going to need to see some ID or, have a parent buy it for you. Otherwise, they won't sell you the game. And that's largely internal. Same thing as you said, Peter, for the movies. If kid wants to see an R-rated movie theaters have policies already saying, no, we're going to, you need somebody, a parent or guardian to let you see that. I don't know. Joshy, how does something like that work in the UK?
Yeah,
because I honestly don't know.
So the UK is similar in some respects and different in others. So like you do, there is an independent body run by the industry, which is called PEGI here in the UK. I don't know what it stands for.
My name is Peggy.
Yeah, but they independently rate the games like they do in America, and they give them age rating. So this is good for 3+. this is for 16s and overs, and that's just simple guidance. And they also put like big labels which says this game has swearing, this has drug references, etc. However, the big difference in the UK is anything which anything the industry deems is likely to be for 15 or over gets sent to another review board called the BBFC, and they are the same people who rate films and DVDs and TV shows and movies, that sort of thing. And anything they rate, so they will give it a great big red 15 or an 18 sticker on the box, and anything they rate is legally binding. Stores are not allowed to sell a 15 rated game to a 14-year-old, and in the same way, cinema owners aren't allowed to let a 13-year-old into an 18-year-old movie, and they can be fined and taken to court and so on if it's proven they have.
So it sounds very much like the California law that was being tried to pass.
Well, see, you say that, but there's a crucial difference between, and really this is, although maybe we can talk about this later, I have no problem with the system we have in the UK. The difference between our system and the one that was being proposed for you was the law being proposed singled out video games. It said, well, video games are different to everything else, so there must be a law that says a child can't buy this if it's violent. However, a child can buy an R-rated movie, that's fine. They were singling out this medium as being different from everything else, and that's completely wrong.
It's something you say that, Josh, because that was one of the findings of fact in the Supreme Court decision as to why it was unconstitutional, is that video games were being singled out over other mediums.
Right, and that was the single biggest problem with that law, with the law trying to be passed.
Right, and it sounds like, Joshy, I mean, that ratings system kind of holds true for all media in the UK. It's an all-encompassing standard.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. So take TV shows for example. Obviously, that's not something that can be rated in the same way, because a violent or a really bad TV show is not suitable for children. They can't say we can't sell this to kids because it's shown on TV. So what they have, I don't know if you have something like this in the US, but they have what's called the watershed, which means you can't play that sort of program before 9 o'clock. It's the same sort of thing, but for a different medium.
They do something similar to that in the US, where they can't have what is considered adult-themed commercials. For example, they can't air any sort of like commercial for like an adult telephone line before, like, I want to say like 9 o'clock Eastern time.
Oh, it's later. I think it's later than that. I think it's like 11.
Late in the evening. It's not 9. I know that. But, in the U.S., I know they rate, at the start of every TV show, there's a little rating up in the corner that displays for about 5-10 seconds that will, say either, TV 14,
MA, PG, PG, Y, Y7.
Things like that. But, yes. But yeah, I mean, and despite all the attempts in the U.S. to try to, regulate and try to criminalize violence, it has largely been unsuccessful because, again, we live and die by our First Amendment in this country.
Well, so you say that, but I think it's probably crucial to highlight that this isn't criminalizing the sale of violent video games. GTA is still fine under this law. The problem is a kid walking into the store who's 12 years old, picking it up and walking out with it. Basically, what they were trying to do, and what the system in the UK is saying, is that at that age, it is the parent's responsibility to say whether or not that kid can enjoy that medium. And in that case, it is illegal for the store employee to sell it. And the only way they can enforce that is to fine the employee who must not sell the goods.
And which segues into another thing. What I think this law would have done is taken responsibility away from the parents and would have put it squarely on the shoulders of, say, GameStop workers who don't get paid nearly enough to become moral arbiters.
They don't get paid nearly enough. People in those kinds of jobs are making minimum wage.
But minimum wage employees work in supermarkets, and they still have to ask for ID if you try to buy alcohol.
Which is why I got out of that business.
That's because if they sell alcohol to a minor, they go to jail.
Yes,
it's not a fine. You go to jail, and now you have a criminal record.
And then good luck finding a non blue collar job.
But it's the same sort of thing, right? It's saying that alcohol isn't suitable for children, and the parents aren't going to be there 24/7, so we must stop them buying it.
It's a little more complicated, actually, when you want to make the comparison to alcohol, because the drinking age in the United States is actually 21, but the legal age of being an adult is 18.
Well, that's your crazy laws. I
know. It is
the drinking age, isn't that here?
It is crazy. In the United States, at 18, you can be old enough to be drafted by the military.
Old enough to vote.
Old enough to vote.
You can vote. What was it? Smoke tobacco.
You can
porn.
You can buy cigarettes. You can buy porn. You can vote. You can be drafted and die for your country, but you cannot buy a beer.
What's the age for driving in the US?
Depends on the state.
It depends. Yeah, it depends on the state.
Okay,
overall,
it
tends to be like most of them it's 16. You can get it as early as 16, although you can get it if you screw up the driving test, or you get for example, in Illinois, if you get a ticket on your record when you're 16, they take it away until your 18th birthday.
Okay.
In some states, Colorado, Texas, Mississippi, Missouri, I think even California too, you could get your license as young as 14.
See, that's crazy to me.
Yeah, I think so.
I got my license at 20.
And also, alcohol is a body and mind altering substance.
Right.
Some of the crazies will argue that video games do the same thing, but...
Well, see, that probably... I don't know how much we want to talk about the decision yet, but that leads on to an interesting thing that the court actually declared that, you've provided no evidence that says these are bad for kids.
Very true. That will factor into the decision, which we'll get to very shortly.
But I think the Supreme Court, of all people, saying that there is simply no evidence provided that violent video games are bad for kids, is such a great thing for the video game industry, because that concept has been hanging over people in the mainstream media for such a long time.
Very true. I mean, and for every study that says violent video games don't do shit, there's an equal and opposing study that says, oh yes, they do. And you're right, Joshi, for the Supreme Court of the United States to come out and say, there's nothing conclusive that proves that violent video games are bad for kids. Yes, that gave the industry a big shit-eating grin.
Well,
it seems to me like we have this argument, we have this fight every time a new something comes along. Back in the 50s, when the comic book industry came out, there was huge suits against that. When rock and roll came about and metal came about, there was huge up-to-dos about that. Then TV and it just goes on and on.
And then, every time we hear about a school shooting, the first thing you hear within seconds is, oh, he was playing Counter-Strike. That's why he did that.
It just seems to me like for every new technology that comes in, it's so detrimental, anything. And the most people you hear this from are not people our age. It's 50s and 60-year-olds. It's not Democrat or Republican. It's a battle of olds versus young.
It's certainly a maturing of the industry that probably every medium has had to fight through. That eventually, the older generations, if you want to put it that way, don't understand the medium as much, and they simply don't realise that because I'm shooting Nazis in Modern Warfare, well, that's an incorrect game, but you get the point, that just because I'm blasting away people every night on a video game doesn't mean I'm going to walk into a school the next day and do the same thing.
Yeah, it's just to me, it's just a generational gap. I found that interesting. I heard actually an interesting stat the other day where the average age of the person in the Senate in the United States, their average age is 58 years old.
That's not surprising, actually.
Yeah. No, it's not. Especially, for what it takes to get into office. For some of them, it's, well, let's just take it a little extreme, but let's talk about the presidency. You gotta be at least 35 to, run. You can't just, be a 22-year-old and, shoot for the moon.
No, you have to be 35 in this country to run for president, so...
And I think senators, for the Senate, I think there's an age requirement there, too. I don't know what it is.
And even the age requirements aside, there's also a statistic going around that the United States is aging. All the baby boomers that were born from way back when they're now getting older. This is why the average age of our country is pushing up and up and up.
And it's definitely important to remember that, just as a random example, I googled Pong, which was released in 1972. That's only 39 years ago. This medium is so young compared to others.
Movies have been around as early as the 1900s. Comic books have been around since the early... news funnies have been around in the early 1900s. Comic books in the 1920s and 1930s. Relatively speaking, video games are maybe 40 years old, we could argue. Maybe.
The other thing is that video games are also evolved with computer technology, and that technology grows rapidly. Anyone who knows Moore's Law can understand what I'm talking about.
Right, so books are still the same, and it's mostly in your imagination 100 years ago from it is today. Video games are advancing every year.
That they are, and with each successive wave of new generations of consoles, there's more photorealism. It's hilarious to me now that Mortal Kombat is about to turn 20 years old, and what was and look at it, 1991, 1992, when the original Mortal Kombat came out, that was perceived as uber violent. I don't think if a game was made like that today, it would get an M rating.
It would probably get like a 3+. It would be suitable for kids.
It probably.
I wouldn't go that far.
I think it would get definitely a T rating. Teen rating for sure. But I mean, just think back in the early 90s when Mortal Kombat was out, and people were up in arms. People are going to be killing each other because I'm going to walk into school with Scorpion Spear shooting out of my hand, and
screaming, "Get over here!" in his early guttural non-preteen voice.
Yeah, and impaling the first fucker who knocked me down on the playground. So, because video games themselves are getting more and more realistic, the thought of kids getting violent, although this is not new. I mean, this was going on as has been mentioned. Every single medium has to go through this.
The moral panic will always continue with the next medium.
Yep.
I'm sure when we finally get to holodecks, this same thing will occur.
We're already starting to kind of get it with 3D gaming. That's starting to pick up, and I think people are gonna flip out over that, saying now it's even more realistically violent.
Well, that's if you can get past the migraine from the 3D glasses. But
it's interesting you mentioned that, because just real quick, that Samsung actually did funded a study that found out that 3D screens actually do increase eye strain.
And it took a scientific study
no
to
shit.
It took a scientific. I love scientific studies that basically reaffirm what we've known for thousands of years.
Yes,
Yeah.
but the difference is that now Samsung can't hide behind any unennial rhetoric if they want to try and sell more 3D screens.
That's very true. Now they have to slap a warning on that. Well, I mean, there's a warning right now on the 3DS, basically saying that may cause cataracts and fried eyes. So things like that.
I think cataracts is a little far, but
Well, veering back.
I got a headache from the 3DS in 3 minutes. Does that mean I'm sterile now?
Yes, you're
Only
now.
only if you drink copious amounts of Mountain Dew.
All right, let's steer this back.
Hey,
Course
Top
correction.
goes.
Course correction. Back we go.
What were you talking about?
So, with all this in mind, this was argued before the Supreme Court, and the video game industry was on tetherhooks to find out what the decision was going to be. Some people thought that, it was in the, some pundits and analysts were like, this is in the bag, this is going to be shot down. And it was. They came to a decision in late June. They shot it down. 7-2 was the final score. 7 justices agreed that it was unconstitutional, and 2 dissented.
One of them on Puritan grounds.
Define that dissented.
Well, the 2 that dissented, one of them, Judge Clarence Thomas, was comparing this to Puritan beliefs. I'll get more specific on that in a moment.
That's practically comical, actually.
I'll get to the specifics on that in just a second. And the other, Stephen Breyer, dissented, and he brought up some very, very good points in his dissent because, whether, deliberately or not, the Supreme Court just reinforced the double standard we have in this country, which is violence good, sex bad.
But that really came to my attention, though, Brian, that they really didn't have a choice. They're going to have to enforce one double standard over another. The one double standard they decided to shoot down is video games are a separate medium from other forms of entertainment. So, in doing so, they had to... You're saying is that you really can't... There's going to be a double standard no matter what the decision's going to be.
Right. So
you might as well have the one double standard that doesn't, impact the constitutional right.
And
it's an interesting question, though. If this same law had been put through, but it was about sexual video games, would it have passed? Because it's still singling out video games as a different medium from everything else.
It's a hard one to predict because in America, we don't have a lot of sexual video games, and none of them are mainstream.
That's very true.
And anything that would be extremely explicit, you can't find on a store shelf. You have to get it online.
Right, because stores aren't going to carry AO-rated games. It's
See, that does show the industry independent rating working, because the ESRB can rate a game AO, and although they don't say by rating it AO, this is never going to be sold, hint hint, the shops independently, in quotes, decide not to hold AO games, and the console manufacturers independently decide not to allow AO games.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does help. Unfortunately, though, there's still, as I see it in this country, a lack of education, because I think, parents also need to play, a responsibility as well as to what their kids can and can't view.
But
haven't we been saying that for years?
Well,
yes,
I mean, not in a podcast per se, but when we all have conversations, just in regular life, we always seem to come back to it comes back to the parent's responsibility to know what the hell their kid is doing, and that doesn't just go to video games; it goes with anything. And
I'll give you a story before we cut to break.
Story time.
Personal experience.
Oh, this would be good.
Yeah, this was when I was working in Walmart.
Are there pictures?
No, thank God. There was a little kid who probably couldn't have been no more than 10 or 11, and he wanted to buy Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Little 10-year-old, little boy, and I immediately knew that it wasn't going to be sold because as soon as one, he's 10, or however old he was certainly not a mature adult. And the register would have also asked me to punch in ID. So I said to the kid, before I get that game for you, I'll need to see your mom or dad. Mother came over a little while later, and the mother at first was he can have the game. And I said, before you buy the game for him, consider the following. And so I led her over and I told her about the ESRB system. I explained that every single video game that's widely available has a rating on the front of the box, and then on the back of the box it explains why why it's rated as it is. And she was looking at me very confused, and she's like, is this a new system? Is this a new rating system? This was probably 2005, 2006. I said, no, this has been around since 94. And she said, I never knew that. Meanwhile, as I'm explaining the rating system...
The kid's furious.
The kid was glowering at me. Because
You're not his friend.
Because he's not stupid. He knows exactly what's in this game. And as I'm explaining the rating system and what the game contains, his chances of getting the game went from 100 to 0. And so it's, he ultimately never got the game because Mom said, oh no, no. And that, is why, there needs to be more education. I mean, I have no idea how well the ESRB is trying to put out the message.
They actually try very hard. My significant other did a research report a few years ago, and her research found that the ESRB poured tons of money into a public relations campaign to teach the people what the rating system was about. It was in store displays, like you saw in like you showed in Walmart. It was on demo discs. It was on television ads. It was all over the place, and parents still missed the memo.
Didn't they get Penny Arcade to do the artwork for it as well?
I don't know about that.
I they did, but anyway, yes, I heard about that too. And it comes back to people are stupid, I guess.
You're just not paying attention.
I mean, when you put it in front of their faces and they still, just walk on by, all you can do is just go, well, we tried.
Nick, I think I know what happens. Anytime you have a technology issue, and games being one of the highest ones, computers another, most people just look at that and go, oh, that's nothing to do with me, and move on. They don't even read the message. They see, oh, computer, game-related, nothing to do with me, and so the message gets totally ignored. But parents are missing the point because they don't want to know. They don't want to know.
This was you voluntarily enforcing this proposed law, though, right? Because you said to the kid, I'm not going to sell that to you, but the law would have allowed you to sell it after his parent had said yes.
Right, I was also enforcing store policy.
So the store is already enforcing the law that was proposed.
Right, except if I had sold the game to the kid, I wouldn't have been fined or, had any manner of criminal record.
The ultimate point here is that, had Brian sold the game, he would have just, gotten a reprimand from his boss. If it was severe enough, he would have gotten the pink slip, and that would be the end of that. But with the law, yeah, Brian could be sitting in a jail cell right now, for all we know.
Or having to pay an enormous fine.
And I don't know about the UK, but once you've got a criminal record in the United States, it's very hard to find another job. Because the prospective employers do criminal background checks.
Yeah, I'm sure it's the same
And,
here.
you know, the last thing I want to do is sit in a jail cell. You know, what are you in for? Murder. What are you in for? Rape. What are you in for? I sold a game that shot people with it.
Right, but so, I mean, I haven't looked into the very specifics of the law, but is it not perhaps the case that the stores are simply fined for breaking this law, and it never goes down to the employee? Maybe the store fires the employee because
please,
of it.
you really think that if the store owner gets fined, that they're not going to fire the person that
Right,
sold
but
the game to begin
that's
with?
not the same as giving the single person the fine and a criminal record. It's just saying, yo, Walmart in so-and-so town, you did this bad thing, here's a fine. Okay, that may fire some employees, but that doesn't give you a criminal record. And basically it's saying, all the law is saying is that, yo, stores, you must all have the same policy Walmart has. It's because at the moment it's voluntary on the store level to say whether or not they have this policy.
Well, anytime we had ever had government regulation on what can and cannot be sold, and the two big ones we have right now obviously are alcohol and cigarettes, it is the employee who gets arrested. And in addition, the store gets fined and may have their license revoked. But the employee does get arrested. But
I'm almost certain that in this law's case, there's no arrest involved. So
we would have to look at the letter of the law, but I would be.
I don't know the specifics, but it would be.
I would argue that the law probably would criminalize the employee, unless we can actually sit down and look at it itself.
Alrighty, and we'll get into the specifics and also the reactions to the decision. We will do that on the second half. We have some excellent debate going on right now, so we will get to all of that, and also what does this ruling mean for the industry. That's on the second half of this episode of Downloadable Content. We will be back. welcome back to this second half of Downloadable Content discussing the Supreme Court decision. We're all still here. Joshy, Peter, Ron, all still here.
Hello?
You're not, but,
Oh, great. So, what is it? President Body, absent in mind? Is that it?
something like that. Nick's here, by the way.
Hi.
Nick's here, by
But
the
we
way.
don't really need him.
Do not make me fly across the pond and smack you.
He'll be waiting for that smack for a good 16 hours then if you hop on a flight.
Good, he'll be sleeping.
No, he won't. He might. Anyway, we did some fact-checking over the break to actually, find out the specifics between all that legalese. For one, the law was actually signed in 2005, so it took 6 years, almost 7 years.
And that was fast for a law.
For it to go all the way to the Supreme Court for this decision. So this has been sitting in our legal system for that long.
Think of the money that was spent on it.
And
plenty.
this is
People
this is
help.
fast compared to the normal operations of the law.
We also found out what the exact repercussions were if this law had come to pass. Peter?
Any person who violates any provision of this title shall be liable in an amount of up to $1,000 or lesser amount as determined by the court. However, this liability shall not apply to any person who violates those provisions if he or she is employed solely in the capacity of a sales clerk or other similar position, and he or she does not have an ownership interest in the business in which the violation occurred and is not employed as a manager in that business.
Now in English.
Basically, the store is culpable. The owner of the store is culpable if he personally did the sale, but the sales clerk, sells minimum wage drones, are not culpable.
Which is what I originally thought, because, as I said, given California, violent video games are a crime, but marijuana isn't.
So I was wrong on that, and now we got that
Yeah,
out.
I win.
There, do you want a prize?
Yes, I do.
There's a one-up mushroom.
But, no, I was under the impression, and mistakenly so, that if a GameStop clerk or a Walmart peon sold a violent video game, they would be the ones be in trouble when, in fact, that's a negative against the store. So what would happen, really, is that store clerk would be fired.
Yeah.
That store clerk would very, very likely be fired. And $1,000, which to a minimum wage drone is a lot of money, but
It is a ton of money.
But as it's the store that's culpable and not the individual clerk, my perspective on it doesn't change. It's still, stores should not be moral arbiters for what their kids can and can't play. Parents need to take a more proactive role. That hasn't changed. So, here we go. Now that the decision has been announced, there was, let's talk about some of the specifics of the decision and some of the reactions to said decision. First, I'll talk about the majority opinion, the 7 justices who did strike down the law. The majority opinion stated that, like the protected plays, books, and movies that preceded them, video games communicate ideas and even social messages through many familiar literary devices, such as characters, dialogue, plot, and music, and through features distinctive to the medium, such as the player's interaction with the virtual world. That suffices to confer First Amendment protection. So now, officially, we have the Supreme Court saying that video games are a protected form of free speech.
Hallelujah.
And in English, basically, you can't single out video games without trying to regulate all the mediums.
Correct.
And if you look at it even further, that description basically says video games are art, which is what I've been saying for years.
Let's not argue that.
So, Justice Antonin Scalia when he wrote the majority opinion, he said that while states may pass laws to block obscene material from minors, as previously decided in the 1968 case Ginsburg versus New York, speech about violence is not obscene. He then referred to children's books like those of the Brothers Grimm, which, contain plenty of violence. Fairy tales.
The King James Bible contains plenty of violence.
He also noted, and I was very glad because he gave the ESRB a nice plug. He also stated that the current self-moderated industry standards like the ESRB are operated effectively to regulate the sale of more mature games to minors. And he said that filling the remaining modest gap in concerned parents' control can hardly be a compelling state interest requiring a law to enforce.
Man, he just went down and punched him in the nads, didn't they?
And again, as we mentioned, the court's decision also determined that from the evidence that was presented, that's important to note, from the evidence that was presented, there was no compelling link between violent video games and their effects on children.
However, the people who were trying to get this law through had 7 years to have a go at this, and they were fairly determined, so I'm sure they found the best evidence they could.
Yep, straight from the hands of one Jack Thompson. Oh, did I say that out loud?
The decision.
Whatever happened to him?
He got disbarred.
He got disbarred.
Oh yeah.
And he's disappeared into obscurity ever since. Although
I think Fox News pulls him out of the cellar every now and then to.
I do miss him.
I miss him like I miss a bad hangover.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Now, Justice Samuel Alito, he also wrote an addition to the majority decision. Though Justice Alito agreed with the constitutional application to the California law, believing that its threshold requirement, in quotes, was too broad. However, he also questioned the potential double standard that exists between violence and sexual content. So,
basically raising the question we mentioned earlier, if this had been a sexual video game law, the Supreme Justices probably would have passed it.
Or at the very least would have looked at this a bit differently.
Yeah.
The decision might have been the same, but it might not have been 7-2. It might have been 5-4.
Or they may have considered it for much longer, or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like what Comedy Central, Jon Stewart said. He said, while one of the Mortal Kombat characters is getting ripped in half, if she were to have, say, a nip slip, regulate away.
Yeah, which is basically what leads to the two justices that dissented, as we mentioned, Clarence Thomas and Stephen Breyer. They were the two who dissented. Justice Thomas, in his dissent, considered that historically, the Founding Fathers, quote, believed parents have complete authority over their minor children and expected parents to direct the development of those children, and that the intent of the First Amendment does not include a right to speak for minors or a right of minors to access speech without going through the minor's parents or guardians. Whatever the hell that means. That was a lot of legalese.
Basically, the parents speak for the children in all aspects, in every way, shape, or form. If you wanted to have anything to do with the child, you had to get their parents' permission. Even as far as maybe a street clown, doing like a magic entertainment for a bunch of children. It really is a very strange interpretation of speech.
Basically, it's saying that the parents would have to be with the kid 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
And Stephen Breyer, he wrote a separate dissent. He was concerned that the majority's decision conflicted with previous rulings from past cases. He contrasted the previous findings regulating sales of publications nudity to those of violent video games. And he said, quote, "But what sense does it make to forbid selling a 13-year-old boy a magazine with an image of a nude woman, while at the same time protecting a sale to that 13-year-old of an interactive video game in which he actively, but virtually, binds and gags the woman, then tortures and kills her?"
Yeah, it's a very creative imagination.
Which, again, affirms the double standard we have in this country. Violence good, sex bad.
We know what
definitely.
he does on the weekend.
Oh.
Oh, Josh, he taking a swipe at the Supreme Court judge.
All the way from across the Atlantic, too.
They can't reach me.
That's why he
I don't
said
know.
It's our own fault. We fought for independence from Britain. This is what we get. We shouldn't have left in the first place, even if King George was an absolute lunatic. But Breyer also argued that this case is ultimately less about censorship than it is about education, believing that the government has a vested interest in allowing parents to make decisions for their child as to raise future generations committed cooperatively to making our system of government work. And that California's law imposes no more than a modest restriction on expression.
How does restricting the sale at the store impinge upon the parent? Or I don't know. It just seems like they're not even related, really. The parent can easily take away the game console from the kid at the house.
Well, ask the justice. Maybe you'll get.
It really doesn't matter. The law was shot down anyways. I'm just finding that his reasoning a little strange.
Perhaps what it's suggesting is that the child would still be exposed to the medium before the parent had the chance to intervene. They could buy the game, get home, and play it for several hours before the parent was able to take it away.
There's something to be said there, I suppose. It's just, a recent study, and I should probably try and find this again and show it to you guys, found that of all the self-regulating industries and content, video games happens to be has the best rate of, not selling violent, M-rated games to minors. And the worst offender was actually music.
I can believe that. I've seen plenty, being around movie theaters, music stores, game stores, and the like. I've seen my fair share of kids who definitely don't even remotely look the age of what they're supposed to be, and they can easily buy all the CDs and watch all the R-rated movies that they care without anyone stopping them. And I think the gaming industry does a good job at least asking for parental consent before they go and get whatever game they want.
So would you perhaps say that this law was perhaps even unnecessary because the industry is practically enforcing this themselves?
That's what I think.
I think ultimately, if the government wants it to do any sort of this kind of regulating, it's got to be across the entire platform. It has got to be kind of like the UK. It's got to be a blanket coverage of everything.
Definitely.
And the government isn't gonna do that because
that will never get through.
The movie industry, the TV industry, heck, even the comic book industry is just far too powerful in the United States for the government to even think about challenging it.
The government won't challenge the movie industry.
Okay.
For crying out loud, you know how much money porn brings into the film industry in this country?
Right.
You would be the one to know that.
You joke, but I want to highlight an important thing here.
Go ahead.
There was a quote from Leland Yee. That's a terrible
God,
name.
not him.
So
That was the legislator who wrote the law.
So this was the guy trying to enforce it, and I want to say straight up that this quote sounds like complete bullshit and etc. He's an idiot, etc. However, his quote when this decision was announced and the law was knocked down was, the US Supreme Court has decided it's going to side with corporate America and Walmart against our children. And that's a very political message. It's meant to be good in newspapers, etc. But it does say exactly what you were saying, which was the people defending video games against this law were the publishers. They were the game makers, the people who want to sell a 12-year-old GTA because they make more money. So he is right. As you said, with, the movie industry is too powerful, this would never get through. This is them siding with corporate America.
But
Leland Yee has been on a crusade against video games for as long as I can remember.
Definitely, and put that aside because I disagree with a lot about him, but he is probably right about that one point.
Except that the industry has been self-policing itself very effectively, so that point really becomes irrelevant. The indie publishers are not making a lot of money by selling Grand Theft Auto to 12-year-olds.
But I think
I would say quite a few 12-year-olds have played GTA.
But it's not so much stopping with this decision, the court, the developers are enjoying this victory because it's not to get 12 and 13-year-olds to play video games. It's for the security of making more games that they want to make for the audiences that exist, is to make those future Grand Theft Auto games for the appropriate audiences to continue to make those games and have people buy them, than to be so hesitant or stop making them altogether because a 12-year-old might accidentally get their hands on it and screw the whole thing up.
The other thing, too, is because the basis of the law had nothing to do with the rating system, as we already discussed. It was this ambiguous other benchmark that wasn't well defined. It really does add a lot of guesswork as to what can game makers make and expect it to be acceptable.
Right. So this gets really to my issue with this being knocked down. The law being proposed was wrong. Right, and I'm glad it was knocked down. It didn't regulate all mediums, which you might say is going too far, but it's simply wrong to regulate one medium over the others. And it also was very ambiguous. It didn't work with the independent rating board. However, to give you to compare it to the UK's system, where it does work with the same rating board and it's regulated across all mediums. Is there necessarily anything wrong with that?
So you're asking, is there anything wrong with an all-encompassing...
Well,
you're asking...
Yeah, what I'm saying is the law proposed was badly made and has several flaws. If those flaws were corrected, is there anything wrong with that?
So you're asking if we would have an issue with regulation over all media?
Effectively, yes.
That's hard for me to personally say because I am of age. I can watch all this without any fear of reprisal. But for the younger audiences, I think needing that parental consent every single time to do anything whatsoever.
Let's be honest. It's not like this is going to happen to you on a daily basis. When I was a kid, I got a game every 6 months if I was lucky, and most of my games were bought by my parents. I mean, it's not going to come up as often as you think.
And it probably wouldn't. That's hard to say. It really is clashing with. I guess it would have to come down to how the First Amendment is translated.
Definitely. The other thing I would probably highlight is there was a lot of argument from gamers and worried about the sort of stigma of, well, if the store can be fined and it's illegal to sell to children, then suddenly everything rated 15 or 18 is going to have like this stigma of, oh, you can't sell that, or it's going to be on the top shelf or some or hidden away or some rubbish like that. In the UK, we have this system, and these games are on the shelves like every other video game. There is no difference because a child can't buy it.
We already have a stigma as being gamers in the United States. Like, if you're trying to get a new job, the last thing you want to tell human resources is that you're a gamer. So
funny, because that was the first thing I told my employers, and I still got the job.
Well, that's good, because that's something I've read that you don't want to normally do, especially when it comes to office work, which is where I'm headed after I get my degree.
But be that as it may, I don't think that, if there was regulation in this country, I don't think it would really, come up all that often. But, I mean, let's face it, we're lazy. And, we don't want to be bothered with having to approve every single time somebody, wants to go see a rated R movie. We hate that in this country. So that's why in my own personal experience from working at Walmart, in the instances where a kid wanted to buy an M-rated video game, a lot of the times the parent just said, "Yeah, whatever, get it."
Yeah, and the law would have allowed that. From an outsider's point of view, I think the real reason, except for the flaws I highlighted earlier, the real reason this was knocked down is the fear that not that this regulation could have come in place, because let's be honest, it wouldn't have affected very much. But the real reason people were afraid of this regulation is more regulation building upon it. In the future, more laws saying that, no, now violent video games are bad for everyone. I think that's the real reason it was knocked down. It's the fear that the law would continue to add upon itself and breach your First Amendment rights.
Yes.
That definitely is something there to be said, yes.
Especially with our known video game opponents, the biggest one right now is Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
No. I would argue the independent in Congress would be the biggest opponent right now.
Well, we have several big names that we always have to keep an eye out on and follow their every move, and we're I guess it's that whole fear of give an inch, take a mile philosophy, and it ultimately comes down to is I like being able to play my games. I don't want anyone screwing with that. And
there it is, Joe Lieberman. Sorry,
yeah, that's another big one. But just being the paranoid man that I am, I just want to make sure that what I do, I can still do as safely as the next person, not have anything be, something legal all of a sudden become illegal. Like, what if Prohibition came back? I'd be screwed.
What we do, but by and large, gamers are not anywhere near as violent or irresponsible as is commonly held. But all of a sudden,
we only hear about, the
extreme cases.
We only hear about the extreme cases because that makes good copy. That makes good news. You're not going to hear about, the gamer who plays Battlefield or Medal of Honor. You're not going to hear stories about, somebody who plays those games and, does volunteer work at a soup kitchen and does good deeds. You're never going to hear that. That's not going to be good news. We're never going to hear about this. We're always going to hear, a 13-year-old boy, shut up a school. We never hear about the vast majority of gamers who play these games who are really just kind, good-hearted people.
I play a Peggle. I could snap at any minute.
Those ball physics, they can drive a man crazy.
It's only these extreme cases because it makes good sensational copy. That's really, really it. So by and large, really, in light of this decision, it's still business as usual for the game industry. But, however, and I'm looking at one of the reactions to this law. and I love Wikipedia because they break this whole thing down very nicely. There was an opinion piece written in the Washington Post, and the opinion said, the op-ed said that the law did nothing to infringe the rights of adults while dealing with reasonable limitations on minors' access to extremely violent video games that even the video game industry acknowledges are inappropriate. And that, while they're, now the fear is, now that the Supreme Court has passed this, has said this, they're still afraid that the challenge will continue because other states will try to enact similar laws. So
but now that precedence has been set, won't they just get shot down?
Very likely, yes, unless they can actually take a different angle.
Right, and
if they take the angle of better defining what type of violence they're talking about, like, say for example, shooting aliens like Halo may be a violent game, but it's not as violent as, say, shooting someone in the head with a 44 in like Modern Warfare.
Right, and I also think that the onus is still on the video game industry for maintaining its own self-policing.
But we've been dealing with that for years, and that's not going to change anytime soon. They always seem to be, if a bit strange at times, they seem to be on the ball for that.
Right, and
even being a little harsher than normal.
Yeah. So, I think that while the challenge isn't over, a big roadblock has now been removed, at least in this country.
Yeah.
By the Supreme Court. One interesting point I'd like to make before we head into final thoughts. There was, again, after the decision, another op-ed writer from the New York Times. He said that the court's decision should be a challenge to the industry to show that they can mature on the decision that video games are a form of art. Questioning the industry with, will you use it as cover to pump out schlock, or will you rise to the opportunity and respectability that has been afforded you?
I don't necessarily think the industry has anything to prove. I think that statement basically says, we've given you a chance, now prove that you're worthy. I mean, since when did any other medium have to do that?
Yeah, well, that's true. So, as we wind down, so what do we think, this effect will have on the industry, if at all?
Very little, because nothing has really changed.
Yeah, it's business as usual, and honestly, the industry is still going to keep one eye over their shoulder for the looming government. Someone else is going to try and pull something funny, and we just got to stay alert.
The game industry is already self-policing. They'll continue to do so.
I think, going back to what we talked about earlier, the fact that the Supreme Court basically said, knock down the whole concept of violent video games causing violent children is a great success for the industry, and this has set some precedents so that unless something is radically different about what's being proposed, this sort of thing won't get through again.
Ron? Or did he?
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I'm a bit more cautious in the sense that I am more concerned with how they're going to handle someone who does define the violence a bit more, or if they're going to tackle the sex side of it, because there may not be an adult-only section in the GameStop, there are those games out there, and I wonder if someone's going to target those eventually, and if someone's going to try and police those.
Well, good luck when they're not being sold in a store.
Yeah, again, it's getting the really adult, sex-like games. You can only get that online, so that's going to be extremely hard to regulate, if not impossible.
Well, that
Yeah,
goes.
somebody is going to try still because they're idiots.
That's going to go towards internet regulation, and good
Yeah.
luck getting into that mess.
Well, let's not get into that because the United States is trying very hard to pass new laws for internet regulation, but that's a discussion for another topic.
Oh, yes, they are. I don't think it's even appropriate to this podcast.
Nope. No, it isn't.
Okay, take us home.
Well, and as you all mentioned, I think this now sets precedent. However, I don't think that this will try to stop states from trying to, say, fine-tune it. Getting that sort of thing. So, I think this is a big victory for the video game industry, and good on the fact that, yes, you can't really, limit every single thing. So, there you go. There you go.
Free speech for the win.
First Amendment!
You still can't say fire in a crowded theater, though. That doesn't work. So, if you want to give us feedback on this or any other downloadable content episode, you can go onto our Facebook, facebook.com/downloadablecontent, or check us out on Twitter @DLContent. Give us your feedback, your thoughts, compliments, rants, raves, cookies, whatever.
I like cookies.
Yeah, we all love
Chocolate chip, please.
Yeah, whatever. Cookies. We love chocolate. And Mountain Dew. And Mountain Dew for Peter. So,
I don't. Well, I do want to be sterile, actually. So, yeah, sure, Mountain Dew.
So there we go. That is our discussion on the Supreme Court case. And I would like to thank Nick, Peter, Joshi, and Ron for some very, very good debate on this issue. So, until next time, I'm Brian. Have a good one, everybody.